Okay, so now that we have covered the Revolutionary War and the Articles of Confederation, this is what we did in response to the Articles of Confederation. This is how we fixed all of those weaknesses and those problems that we had covered last class. Okay, so big weaknesses in the Articles of Confederation. You have it provides for no common currency, so each state can have their own money. It gives each state one vote regardless of its size based on population, which you can bet that ticks off the big states, but it makes the little states really happy. It gives Congress no power to tax or regulate the commerce among the states. So, again, that means no money for the federal government. It provides for a weak central government, which means that nothing really ever gets done. And then there's also no executive or judicial branch, so that means no president, no court system. Okay, so Shays Rebellion was post Revolutionary War, post Articles of Confederation. It was kind of caused by the Articles of Confederation, too. So, following the Revolutionary War, there was a lot of money problems going on in America. The veterans still hadn't been paid for fighting in the war. Farm prices were low, and therefore farmers couldn't pay their debts. And because a lot of people couldn't pay their debts, they wound up in prison. Daniel Shays was a veteran from the Revolutionary War, and he was completely upset by the treatment of his fellow veterans. So in November of 1786, he gathered a bunch of farmers in Massachusetts, and they wanted to shut down the courts to stop the legislative process throwing them into jail. And then also they wanted to seize the Springfield Armory so that they could get the supplies that were there. They were opposed by the Massachusetts militia, and the rebellious ones scattered. It was a big problem. The results of it were, though, that the government's inability to put down the rebellion quickly highlighted the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. So, a lot of people, realizing the need to repair the problems with the Articles, they decided to send delegates and do something about all of these issues. So in 1787, delegates from 12 states met secretly in Philadelphia to draft a new government for the U.S. The old government, the Articles of Confederation, was very, very weak and very clearly not working. So Rhode Island didn't attend, but all of the other 12 states did. And then it was also held in private because the delegates knew that if the public found out they were meeting to abolish the Articles, there would be so much opposition that the convention wouldn't actually get anything done. So that's why they had to keep it held in secret. So the purpose of the Constitutional Convention was to first amend the Articles of the Confederation. The next was make constitutional law the supreme law of the land, so basically federal law. The third was to give states the leeway to govern themselves. So don't take all the power away from the states, but give a little more to the federal government. And then final thing was establish limits on government authority. Again, give the federal government more power, but don't give them all the power. Um, so George Washington was president of the convention. He presided over the convention, but he rarely participated in the debates. What he did, though, was lend his reputation to the proceedings to make them more legitimate. He was just kind of overseeing all of it, make sure people don't fight too much, and like stuff actually gets done. That was Washington's job for the convention. Now, James Madison, he was known as the father of the Constitution. He's also from Virginia, and he was a brilliant debater. He led a lot of the debates for the Constitution. He kept copious notes of the proceedings. They were incredible, and that's why he's called the father of the Constitution. And he's the author of the Virginia Plan. The Virginia Plan proposed a balanced government of 3 separate branches: legislative, judicial, and executive. Later on, he ended up authoring much of the Bill of Rights, and in order to create that, he used the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, written by Jefferson, and the Virginia Declaration of Rights, written by Mason. So Virginia had a very, very big hand in creating the Constitution that we know today. So, under the Articles of Confederation, one of the major problems was major powers were held by the individual states. The Constitution tried to fix that by having the powers shared between the states and the central government. Another problem under the Articles of Confederation was the national government had no power to tax and no power to enforce the laws. The Constitution gave the national government the power to tax and regulate trade. And then also another problem with the Articles was at the national level there was a one-house legislature, no executive, no court system. And then at the constitutional level, 3 branches of government were created: executive, legislative, and judicial. So issue number 1 was state representation. If you look at the population of selected states in 1790, you can see that the population of southern states far outweighs the New England states. New York actually also had a very large population, but it was still held to just 1 vote. So a lot of people were getting very irritated in the southern states at the New England states for being like, oh my gosh, why are you guys so small? So now the plan is you have a Congress made up of 2 houses. So you've got the House of Representatives, and then you have the Senate. In the House of Representatives, you have representatives based on population size. And then in the Senate, you have the representatives, or the congressmen or senators. They are the same per state. Each state has 2. And that's even the case today. There are still only 100 senators, 2 for every state. So House of Representatives, that changes based on population size, based on the censuses, which are done every 10 years. So that way we know the actual population size. So now we are based on population. So how should states be represented in Congress? You got the New Jersey Plan, which said that each state gets an equal number. So that obviously then becomes the Senate. And then you've also got the Virginia Plan, which based representation on population. So the compromise is known as the Great Compromise, where Senate is equal and representation in the House is based on population. So the Great Compromise balanced the power between large and small, gave a bicameral legislature, Congress. Bicameral means 2 houses. Senate, 2 reps per state. House of Reps, number of reps based on population. This compromise balanced the power between large and small states. It made everybody happier. Next issue we have is Southern states' representation in Congress. There's a lot of slaves in the southern states, and they're not counting towards anything. That you could clearly see would be ticking off a lot of those big plantation owners in the South. So the northern states said the slaves shouldn't be used for representation, only for tax purposes. And the southern states said only for representation, not for tax purposes. So the northern states wanted to charge the South more money for their slaves and not allow them to count for representation. The southern states said, hold on, we don't want to pay for them even more. We don't want to pay taxes on them. We only want to use them towards representation in Congress. So the compromise is known as the 3/5 compromise. Slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person for both representation and tax purposes. So that goes into their count for representatives in the House of Representatives. So it became that the slaves were now legitimately in the Constitution as 3/5 of a person. So the third issue, the central government is too powerful. The framers were concerned that the central government could grow too powerful and become like a king. We can understand that. It was a sketchy time for us in America. So under the Virginia Plan, you have James Madison created it and proposed a federal government with 3 separate branches. The legislative or Congress makes the laws, the executive or the president enforces the laws, and then the judicial or the courts interprets the laws. It provided a lot of checks and balances among the 3 branches to keep any one of them from becoming too powerful. So the president chooses judges, the Senate approves the judges, Congress passes laws, the president can veto laws, but then Congress can override the veto with 2/3 of a vote. The fourth issue, the federal government was too powerful. The Constitution limits the powers of the federal government to those specifically identified in the Constitution. Federal law becomes the supreme law of the land when constitutional, but otherwise gives the states a lot of leeway to do what they want to do. Ratification of the Constitution. In order for the Constitution to become the supreme law of the land, it had to first be ratified or approved by at least 9 of the 13 states. Remember that from the Articles. The people who were for the Constitution were called Federalists, and the people who were against the Constitution were called Anti-Federalists. So the Anti-Federalists, 2 major opponents of ratification were George Mason and Patrick Henry, big Virginians. They were against it because they feared an overly powerful central government that was destructive to the rights of individuals and destructive to the privileges or rights or prerogatives of the states. Today, the people who think a lot like that are conservative thinkers. They look for liberty, individual initiative, and free markets. Now, Federalists were people who were pro-ratification, were George Washington and James Madison, again, big Virginians. They were in favor of the Constitution because they saw how important a strong central government was. It promotes economic development, it promotes public improvement like roads and such. Today, the people who most mirror those thoughts are those who see a primary role for the federal government in solving the national problems and getting things done. So the Federalists, they said, yes, we should vote for the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists said, no, no voting for the Constitution. So compromising was they passed the Constitution when the Federalists said, okay, we will add a Bill of Rights if you guys will help us pass it. So that's what happened. So the Bill of Rights, it was written by James Madison, and it guarantees the individual rights of freedom of religion, speech, press, and assembly. It also guarantees individuals the right to bear arms, be represented by a lawyer, and to a trial by jury. Anti-Federalists insisted that the Bill of Rights be the first order of business for the new government before they would agree to the Constitution. Fair enough. So Virginia influence in it were the Virginia Declaration of Rights by George Mason and the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom by Thomas Jefferson. In the Virginia Declaration of Rights, Mason states again Locke's ideas that government should not violate basic human rights. So that goes into speech, the right to protest, freedom of religion, all that kind of stuff. Now, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, it was written by Thomas Jefferson, and actually it was one of his proudest things that he ever did. In fact, he didn't put many things on his tombstone. This was one of them. He was very, very proud of it. And it said that government should not support one favored church. So like the South, they supported the Church of England. He didn't want that anymore. He wanted people to be able to be free to choose whichever religion that they wanted to. And that the government couldn't influence you one way or the other. So paraphrasing the Virginia statute, I strongly suggest you read it. It's a good thing to really read. But then otherwise, thanks for listening.